You should know when it's time to step back. This is no longer your era." That sentence rang out clearly, coldly, like a blade slicing through the air, right in the middle of the conference room, in front of me, in front of my son, in front of the management team I had handpicked and led for more than 3 decades. I didn't react immediately. I waited for David, my son, to say something, a word of defense, a look of understanding, or at least a silent nod. But he only bowed his head, hands clasped together beneath the table, motionless like a statue, as if by staying silent long enough, the problem would disappear on its own. Linda, my daughter-in-law, continued, in that calm, professional voice she uses when pitching to clients. "We acknowledge your contributions, but the company needs a new direction, bolder, more modern, less attached to emotions and outdated values. You can still stay, but in a symbolic role." I let out a small laugh. I used to think she was only good at branding. Turns out, she also knew how to use words to push someone out of their own company, without touching the doorknob. The meeting ended. I stood up, as usual, slowly, calmly. But something had changed. My heart was no longer as quiet as before. It all started many years ago. My wife and I pooled all our savings to rent an old warehouse in northern Wisconsin. The roof leaked. No air conditioning. Just the 2 of us and the tomato sauce recipe passed down from our mother. We labeled everything by hand, wiped down every bottle with clean cloth, and made deliveries in an old pickup truck. No conference room. No payroll. No long-term strategy. 35 years later, we had a factory, production lines, a distribution network that spanned the Midwest, and a family I once believed was unbreakable. David, my son, studied finance. Linda, his wife, earned an MBA and took charge of marketing. I used to think, I'm lucky. But luck, if not held onto tightly, can turn into illusion. I gave them power, but never surrendered the soul of the company. I stepped back, but I never expected to be shut out. Yet today, I stood on the sidelines, watching everything I built being reduced to revenue charts and profit margins. And if they think I will quietly walk away, then perhaps they've forgotten one thing. I'm not the kind of man who builds something just to watch it change without a fight. I'm the kind of man who takes action, even when everyone else turns their back on me. The company began in an old warehouse on the outskirts of Appleton in northern Wisconsin. That first winter, snow blanketed the driveway. My wife, Grace, and I got up at 4 a.m., lit the wood stove in the dark, and cooked each batch of sauce in my grandmother's old aluminum pot. No production line. No funding. Every jar was hand-poured, sealed manually, labeled with paper stickers, and carefully packed into recycled cartons we got from the neighborhood grocery store. We called it Miller's Harvest, because really, it was all a middle-class family could harvest from honest labor. Grace had small hands, but strong and tireless. She worked and hummed as she went. And me, I always looked just a little further ahead. A small shop, then a local brand, and maybe, one day, our product sitting on grocery shelves across the Midwest. We didn't move fast, but we never stopped. David, my son, grew up among sauce boxes and nights when I fell asleep over the accounting books. He was a good kid, curious, always asking questions, always willing to try. When he earned a scholarship to study finance at the University of Minnesota, I was certain the next generation will be better than us. I used to feel proud, thinking, he'll carry the Miller name even further. Linda, his wife, was different. Smart, sharp, and full of ambition. I once believed that was a good thing. In business, you need people who see far and dream big. When Linda joined the company, she brought with her a fresh breeze. She revamped the packaging, grew our social media, and opened negotiations with major supermarket chains. She was good, no denying that. The only thing is, she didn't have memories here. She never smelled the tomatoes boiling on the stove, never saw my mother's hands stirring sauce pots in the dim light of a winter morning. The company truly began to grow. Sales increased. The office expanded. Employees now wore uniforms with our logo. There were keycards, an internal email system, and quarterly strategy workshops. On paper, I was still chairman of the board, but in reality, I gradually became Uncle Miller, the founder. The name printed neatly beneath the logo. I didn't resist change. No one wants things to stay the same forever. I stepped back, not because I was forced to, but because I believed my family would preserve the core, work with integrity, stay true, live honestly. I still came to the factory every morning, made my rounds to greet the teams, had lunch with a few old workers, then headed home early. I withdrew gently, respectfully, until I started getting left out of important emails. Then I overheard something from the accounting office. The sauce recipe was being changed. Less fresh ingredients, more preservatives, to better align with modern logistics, they said. Then one quarter, I simply wasn't invited to the board meeting. No letter, no explanation. No one mentioned it. In my entire life, I had never been forgotten like that. Someone wanted me to disappear. I started paying closer attention. The way Linda glanced when I spoke. The vague phrases in team meetings. Strategy drafts that no longer mentioned core values, but instead emphasized growth maximization. They still smiled when I asked questions. Told me everything was fine, but I didn't need them to say it. I only needed to look into Linda's eyes when she said, "You just rest easy. We'll take care of everything." And I understood. In that moment, the company was no longer mine. They had already decided to push me out. I didn't react. I didn't get angry. But I also didn't step back any further. Because there's one thing they never knew. I've never let anyone else write my final chapter. And this time will be no different. Everything crossed the line on a Tuesday morning. I arrived at the factory as usual. But this time, the entrance to the production area had a new fingerprint system. The security guard, a young man I had personally signed off on as an intern back in his sophomore year, stood in front of the scanner, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir. Your ID hasn't been updated in the system yet. I'll call the tech department," he said. But the way he avoided my gaze, the way his fingers tapped nervously on his phone, it told me everything. This wasn't a technical glitch. This was intentional. I walked into the office, only to find my desk completely cleared. The file cabinet was locked. A small, neat label was taped to the glass door. "Vacant office, scheduled for team meeting conversion." I headed straight to the executive room. I pushed the door open just as the morning meeting was underway. Linda looked up, calm, as if she had expected me. "You came without notice, Dad. I thought you agreed to take medical leave for recovery." I looked around the room. No one said a word. Only Linda held her gaze, confident and steady. "Who authorized the change in our traditional sauce recipe?" I asked. Linda didn't blink. Her voice was even, sharp. "R&D and logistics confirmed. The new formula extends shelf life by 3 months, reduces cold storage costs, and increases profit margin by 4.2%. We also surveyed. 85% of customers didn't notice any difference." I paused, not because of the numbers, but because of that phrase. Didn't notice any difference. Slowly I said, "Do you realize that every year I visit schools and personally hand out scholarships with this sauce, telling them it's handmade, from my mother's recipe?" Linda smiled. "The market has changed, Dad. Sentimentality can't be a barrier to smart management." I turned to David. He sat still. His fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the table, a childhood habit whenever he was nervous or unsure. I looked at my son for a long moment, and I understood. He wasn't steering the ship anymore. Linda was, and perhaps he had accepted it. I walked out of that meeting. That afternoon, I called my lawyer. If I want to sell all my shares, the full 51%, what would I need to prepare? I asked. There was a pause on the line. Then came the question. Are you sure? I looked out the window. New supply crates were being delivered, all canned, industrial tomatoes. No more scent of soil. No more sunshine from the old farm. I answered, my voice not loud, but firm. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Because if this company no longer carries its soul, then I, the one who built it with my own two hands, must preserve what still remains untouched honor, and the right to choose. I didn't drive straight home. Instead, I went to a small cafe near the county courthouse, the same place where I had signed my very first lease for the sauce workshop. The old wooden table on the patio was still there, with a carving that read, RM plus GM, a line Grace used to joke about, a limited liability company with one wife only. I ordered a black coffee, took out my phone. I called Mark Reynolds, an old friend, former corporate finance consultant in Milwaukee, now retired and working in M&A advisory. He picked up right away. Richard? I just read about Better Classic in the papers. New product line, huh? Making waves. I chuckled, my voice hoarse. I didn't call for your review. I called to ask if I want to divest the full 51%. Where should I begin? A short pause. Then Mark replied, I'll be in Appleton tomorrow morning, bringing a valuation expert. 3 days later, we had a preliminary valuation. The company was estimated to be worth between $420 and $450 million, assuming the original brand remained intact and no major disruptions occurred. But if they went ahead with the IPO, the plan Linda was pushing, the value could be even higher. However, the risk would also increase exponentially, especially if internal conflict or lawsuits arose over product changes. I didn't want lawsuits. I didn't want drawn-out conflict. I just wanted to end things in a way that made them understand. Being pushed away from the table doesn't mean losing the power to decide. I arranged a private meeting with a representative from Hearth and Grain Incorporated, a long-standing family-owned food corporation based in Minnesota. Years ago, they had expressed interest in partnering, but Linda dismissed them as relics from a bygone era. 1 week later, they came back with an official offer. Acquire my entire 51% stake. Keep all current staff in place for 2 years. No changes allowed to the original product formula. Dedicate 5% of annual profits to establish and sustain the Miller Foundation Scholarship Fund, something I had always supported out of pocket. All strategic operations would be handled by their new board. David could stay on as an advisor, but it wasn't required. 1 week later, everything was ready. The contract was sealed. Legal documents signed. The escrow account held the advance deposit. Only one final step remained. Officially informing the board of directors. I scheduled the meeting for Friday morning. The notice read, Emergency meeting, strategic direction for the new phase. Linda walked into the boardroom with confident steps. A new blazer, hair neatly tied, arms holding a thick folder. She thought I had come to ask for control back. She thought I needed honor. She was wrong. I hadn't come to reclaim anything. I came to let go, in a way no one expected. The meeting began like any other. Numbers, financial reports, investment plans. Linda presented clearly, the perfect executive. Her voice steady, fluent, eyes fixed firmly on the board. And if we time the IPO right, she said, the company's valuation could exceed $600 million, provided, of course, we get the full consent of all major shareholders. She turned to me, smiled, a polite, calculated smile. I hope you'll consider the long-term benefits and support our new growth strategy, Dad. I simply placed a brown leather folder on the table, then opened it. Inside was a fully executed share transfer agreement, signed, notarized, and legally binding. Hearth and Grain Incorporated was now the official owner of 51% of Miller's Harvest shares, effective from 9 a.m. this morning. Linda stared at the folder, didn't blink, her lips pressed tight. I looked around the room. My voice was low, but clear. I'm not here to oppose the IPO. I'm here to say, as of today, it's no longer my concern. The room froze. One person from finance flipped through documents. Another glanced at David. He sat still, leaned back, fingers clasped tightly, stunned. Linda tried to stay composed. You can't do this behind our backs. No prior notice, no board discussion. I looked her straight in the eye, my voice even. I don't need to. I'm the majority shareholder, and I followed the company charter. Her face went pale. Someone else coughed, the only sound in the dead quiet room. I closed the folder, gently, like closing an old door. I'm not keeping a seat. I'm not keeping a name. But I've kept the most important thing, the soul of this company, at least until the very last moment. I left the boardroom without looking back, and I knew, behind that door, everything would change. But out there, where the little field lay, where the first batch of sauce was stirred with the rough wooden spoon, the real legacy still remained. Because sometimes, to protect what you love, holding on isn't enough. It's knowing when to let go. I never returned to the office after that morning. The lakeside cabin in northern Vermont, the one I used to visit just a few weeks each year, became my full-time home. Every morning, I brewed coffee using the old machine from the factory. Then I'd sit on the porch, watching the still water, like it had never witnessed a single board meeting. 1 month after the deal, I received a gray envelope. No name on the return address, only the company's old address. Inside was a handwritten note. Not long. No salutation. The handwriting, unmistakably David's. I don't know what to say, but I remember how you used to wash every sauce bottle by hand. I remember the scholarships you signed one by one. I remember the nights you skipped dinner just to finish a shipment. I'm sorry for staying silent so long, and thank you for not staying silent like I did. I folded the letter, placed it in the wooden drawer beside my bed, along with old photographs, a wooden spoon, and Grace's handwritten recipe draft. Things I never thought of as possessions, but in the end, they were what remained. One afternoon, I brought a few ingredients out behind the house. A copper pot, fresh tomatoes from the farmer's market, some basil and oregano leaves. No assembly lines, no accountants, no cost sheets. I made a small batch of sauce, poured it into a few plain glass jars, then hand-wrote a single line on each label, for those who still remember what good tastes like. I brought the jars to the nearby nursing home. They didn't know who I was, and they didn't need to. In the evening, I lit the fireplace, poured myself a glass of bourbon, and played an old recording of Grace singing lullabies to David, her voice thin but gentle, as if time could never wear down what's truly sincere. Someone once asked me if I had any regrets. I thought for a moment, then answered, I don't regret stepping back. I don't regret not fighting. And I certainly don't regret letting go at the right time. Because when a chapter ends, what matters isn't who stays behind. It's what you leave with in your hands and in your heart. I walked away from the company I built, but I didn't lose it. I simply left it at the right time, before it became something I could no longer recognize. If you've ever let go of something, a job, a dream, a role you thought you hold forever, maybe you'll understand. Strength isn't in holding tight. It's in knowing how and when to let go. Backhand index pointing right, share your story in the comments below. And if you're on your own journey to reclaim your sense of self, remember, you're not alone. Like, subscribe, and come back here whenever you need a reminder that you still hold the right to choose how your story ends.